Amen, amen. I remember several years ago now, gosh, 11 years ago now, um, Pastor Dirk made an announcement that he was going to be leaving the church and uh, going to Thailand to help rescue kids out of human trafficking. And as much as I know in my heart and my mind that that's needed, I was like, what? But I remember one of the stories he came back with was they have a thing over there. It's kind of funny how we don't have to explain it so much anymore, but they had a thing over there back then that today is pretty prominent called Ladyboys. And you don't have to explain that anymore, which is kind of odd for me because I think we all understand what that means. But they went in to him and Bobby went in to get a pedicure. She wanted to get a pedicure. So Dirk was like, okay, I'll let somebody touch my feet with you. And they go in and they sit down and they're waiting for girls to come and do a pedicure on them. And when he looked up, he saw a girl and a lady boy coming. And he was like, oh, dear Lord, let the girl come to me. And when he looked up after praying, it's not the way it went. And this young boy knelt down, dressed as a girl, and began to do his pedicure on his feet. And he thought, I didn't know how to react. And he said, and I heard in my head, I heard a voice say, I touched many people that people wouldn't touch. Who will you not allow to touch you in my name? It's crazy to think of it like that. But the truth is, we have opportunities all the time to share with people that other people wouldn't take the time to share with. And as an ambassador of Christ, you should be willing to love on them. Not condone, not condemn, but to love on them. When I saw the film that we shared on Friday, I knew immediately that I needed to share that in the church. And it's a very hard subject to talk about. And after talking with the board, I made that decision. Someone brought up Caleb's name. And I was like, oh, that would be perfect to have him come and do a Q&A after the movie, and then to have him come and preach that Sunday following to share with us how God has taken him and called him into an uncomfortable place for most of us. And I won't put words in his mouth. He'll come and share for himself. But we are honored. I'm honored to have Caleb Munson, who is a local. As local as they get. It's like 2.5 blocks from here. Did you guys drive over here? Lazy. That was. This is true. The seatbelt really does help. But I'm thankful for what they do. I'm thankful that they are a part of our community, and I'm thankful that he was gracious enough to come and share with us. So if you would please welcome Caleb.
How are we doing this morning? Good. Are we awake, alive, and excited? All right. I would say hopefully it's one of those. Everyone's alive. We're going to work on excited and awake. Some of you are falling asleep. I see you. But great to be with you today. As was said, my name is Caleb Munson, and I live really close by. No traffic on the way here, no stoplights. It was incredible. So But great to be with you this morning to share about the ministry that God has called us to do surrounding the issue of human trafficking. It's a fun topic, right? Really exciting, right? But just to share about what God has called us to do over the last 7 years that we've dedicated our life to this. I was a youth pastor for 3 years in Frazee, and then God wrecked my plans. Does God do that to any of you guys? Right? It's amazing. But completely changed my plan for life as he called me into this. It's a long story, but we've been loving it ever since. It's hard, but also we see God's blessing on it. So before I get to the good stuff, just some intro stuff. On the back table, there's also a sign-up sheet, a clipboard. If you don't know what that thing is, there's a clipboard for you, okay? But those of you that do know what a QR code is, you can sign up for a newsletter list. That way, 3 months from now, if you're drinking your coffee at 6 in the morning, and you say, I wonder what Caleb is doing, you'll get my email newsletter that I send every once in a while, and you can stay updated. I'll skip that slide. Really quick, I'm going to introduce my family. We usually do a family picture, but because we're live streaming, we don't put that on the live stream for our safety. But they're actually with us today. That doesn't happen often. But my wife, Brittany, is in the back. And then our almost 3-year-old son is back there. And we do have a 1-year-old son as well. We forgot him at home, so no. Grandma's watching him this morning. There was no way he was going to make it through church today. So that is our family. Would love to connect with you after service. But as we look at the issue of human trafficking, I want you to think real briefly right now what you first think of when you think of human trafficking. Maybe the news channel you watch, what they tell you. Maybe what Facebook tells you, right? The different things you see on that wonderful, terrible app called Facebook. All the different movies that you've seen, right? There was a big movie that came out about 3 years ago about this issue. And if I were to poll you this morning, which I'm not going to do, there's enough polls out right now, right? Elections are coming up, fun times. But if I were to poll you this morning, many of you would probably say, unless you're here Friday night, that it's abductions and kidnappings, right? That's what most people think of when they think of human trafficking. But actually, the truth is less than 1% of victims of trafficking will ever be forcefully taken or abducted. But yeah, that's not what the media tells us, right? That's what we all imagine, right? We see the white vans and the semi-trailers, and many people are like, oh, we live on Highway 10 or I-94 or whatever it is, so we must be on a corridor of human trafficking. But that's not how it happens in America. Also, depending what news you watch, you might believe that this wonderful thing called the border, right? We've been talking about that for the last couple of years in the news. Many people think, well, it's a border issue, and I'm not going to get political this morning, all right? That's as far as I'm going to go. But many people believe that because of that, we have this big influx of trafficking. But from our ministry and what stats will tell you, 88% of victims of trafficking are U.S. citizens in our country. And the reason why I share that is because we have to realize it's no longer somebody else's issue. These are our own kids. These are our grandkids. These are the kids that you taught in school all year long last year if you're a teacher. These are the kids that we know about that are being affected by human trafficking. But if we spend our whole life imagining that, well, it's this other thing, it's abductions, or it's all these other people, we are completely blind to the fact that maybe it's just a couple doors down from where you actually live. To realize that we need to pay attention to what's happening around us. In fact, the leading form of trafficking, it's the most heartbreaking form in my world. It's called familial trafficking. It's not a stranger. It's mom, it's dad, it's step-parent, it's uncle. That is the one that's actually forcing them into this. And the hardest thing about that is that they aren't missing. Nobody's looking for them because they're home every night. They go to school most days. At 3 o'clock, they once again go home, but their life behind closed doors is something that you and I could never imagine. And being a parent now, I can't imagine how it ever would get to that point. But working in this for 7 years, most often it's connected to somebody having a drug addiction that they can't afford. And that's how they afford their drug habit. Just a couple of years ago, we were in Joplin, Missouri, doing school assemblies. It's one of the greatest ministries that we have to identify familial trafficking because, as I mentioned, they're not missing. They're at school. And most of these victims don't realize they're being trafficked. You might be like, how does that happen? Well, when you're a young kid, you do what your parents tell you, right? Hopefully we're still working on that, right? But you believe what your parents tell you. If they tell you that this is just what every other kid does, if you imagine that this is everybody's life, you never even start to question it because you were raised in it. And then eventually the moment comes when you're sitting at a cafeteria table and somebody says something and another friend says, "What did you just say?" That's happening to you. Or in our case, a school assembly is happening, and we're, as I said, in Joplin, Missouri. And at the end of every school assembly, we do an altar call. You guys know what that is? Right? But we can't call it that, right, because we're in schools. So we put on the worship music with no words, okay? And then we roll out this big white piece of paper, which later on I'll show you some slides of some of those testimonies. But we roll out this big white piece of paper, and we give all the kids Sharpies. Now, every janitor starts sweating, okay, when you give kids Sharpies in a school gym. But at the end of the assembly, we've all shared our stories. We have a survivor of trafficking that shares her story. We have a survivor of a suicide attempt that shares his story. We all share our experiences, and at the end, we look at the students and say, "You've heard our stories. Now we want to hear your story. What's your story?" And you might think it's a simple thing, but for many students in our country, they are just begging for somebody to wait long enough to just listen to them and hear their story for what it really is. You think they're around everyone, they're on social media, but really, when's the last time somebody that they feel like they can trust said, "I want to hear your story. What's really happening?" And we make a very dangerous promise. My wife is a counselor. She doesn't like when I say that from the stage because she doesn't do free therapy, okay? So don't go to her after service for free therapy. But she would even admit it's a dangerous promise, but the promise that we make is that we promise, if you tell us your story today, we will get you help. It's a hard promise because there's a lot of governmental organizations involved, right? You got CPS, you got social workers, you have all the different things, but we're willing to make that promise because we will not leave that school until that student gets the help that they need. So back to Joplin. At the end of the assembly, we invite every student down, and when I first saw it happen, I didn't imagine that many kids would come down, right? You guys ever work with junior hires? All right. I was a youth pastor, okay? I know how it goes. So we invite every student down to the floor. There's about 2,000 students in the gym, and they come rushing down to the gym floor, 95% of the kids. And they take these Sharpies and they write out their stories, and as they're writing their stories, tears are staining their stories that they are writing. I wish every one of you could be in the room for one of these assemblies because it is one of the most impactful things. And while all of this organized chaos is happening, as they're writing their stories of what they faced at young ages, a young student pulls us to the side. He's 17 years old, and he says, "Hey, my name is Stephen. Can I tell you my story?" So we go out in the hallway with Stephen, and he said, "I never knew before today, but for the last 7 years of my life, I have been trafficked by my mom at the truck stops of Joplin, Missouri." He's like, "Before you guys told us what trafficking is, I thought it was what every other kid went through." He said, "I remember the day like it was yesterday because at a young age, I grew up sitting in the car while my mom would go from truck to truck selling herself. And that day when I was 10, she came back. I was playing on my iPad, and I thought we were going to go home, but she said, 'Stephen, I need you to come with me.' See, that night, the drugs had done too much damage to her by then that everyone rejected her that night. And she knew that she needed her next fix. She needed to get her next high. So Stephen went with her, and he said, 'I remember the day like it was yesterday, as you can imagine.' He's like, the semi was red. She knocked on the door, and the driver opened the door, and he said, 'I already said no to you.' And she turned around and said, 'Yes, but what about him?' The first time Stephen was ever sold. And for the next 7 years, this would repeat itself over and over again, nights and weekends. This was his life, and he never knew anything different. Why? Because some crazy people like us on our team are willing to leave the walls of the church and go into the places of our country that simply need help. when people talk about trafficking and they wonder, is it really happening here, right? Like, I know the movies say so, and obviously our organization says so, but is it really that bad? Well, stats will tell us yes, right? We're in the top 3 worst countries every single year. Minnesota's in the top 10 worst countries almost every single year. But beyond stats, they'll tell you is we have traveled the country with these school assemblies in big towns and small towns, in rich towns and poor towns, right? You can tell as you're driving in. We have yet to drive away from a school assembly without having at least one kid rescued from human trafficking. Every community that we go to. It's a reality that we face, and it's why I'm willing to say that every single town, there is at least one victim of trafficking right now. That I believe even blocks from here last night, their night was something that you could never imagine. But nobody seems to notice. A couple statistics for you this morning. I've already shared a few. But the average age for a girl to first be trafficked in the U.S. is only 13 years of age. It's this fine line as we look at this topic, and Pastor Stu and I were talking about this earlier, was we need to talk about this issue with kids before that happens. Right? We can't hide this issue until somebody is 18 years old to confront this issue, because by then, like Stephen's story, it had been 7 years too late. Right? And for boys are not immune to this issue. Now, majority of it is girls, but boys at only 11 years old, for the first time they will be trafficked. Now, if you remember math, some of you, that was a couple years ago. But to get averages, there's a lot younger numbers involved in those numbers. With the youngest girl we've ever worked with started at 5 years old. The age of 5. So as we look at this issue and we say, what can we do about it, right? I remember 7 years ago, I always say I jumped into a really deep pool, and then there was no water in the pool. Anyone ever done that in life? Right? You just jump. You're like, oh no. That was my situation. I'm gonna do something about this. I'm passionate. I had youth students in Frazee that were being targeted by traffickers online on Snapchat, and I couldn't escape it anymore. And so I jumped in and said, I'm gonna do something. And then you realize it's not what the movies tell us, right? It's not what we imagine it to be. And when I co-founded this organization with another guy, we're both recovering youth pastors, okay? Our heart was, let's reach people where they are. Let's go to the victims, because if we stay in one spot and just wait for victims to come to us, they're never going to show up, right? We have to go to where they are. And one of the first things we started was missions trips to Las Vegas. Now, is it worse than Las Vegas? I would argue no per capita. It's just more above the street level, right? It's easier to identify. And so we bring teams down to Las Vegas, the random people, right? Like you guys, right? Not the special people. I haven't met those special people, okay? That say, I want to do something. I want to be a part of doing something. Like, yes, I want to give money. That's important. But I want to do something. This is how we connect people with their passion. To say you can be face to face with hundreds of victims this week and reach them right where they are. We go to massage parlors. We do a lot of different stuff. But one of my favorite things is we go to these vulnerable apartment complexes. This one in the picture, there's 4,000 residents in one complex. Anybody love their neighbors enough for that? I don't, right? Right? But 4,000 people living literally in like a hotel room size. There's families of 6 kids and 2 adults living in a hotel room sized apartment. And it's a weekly rental. They pay cash on Friday, and background checks are optional, right? One of those types of places. And as we went to the first one that we did, the security guard came out. He's like, oh, you guys are going to do that here. He's like, just so you know, this is a very dangerous place. He's like, every single week a body bag leaves this complex. Somebody is killed. Trafficking happens. There's drugs that are happening, right? All this different stuff. He's like, I don't know if you guys really want to be here. And we looked at him and said, that's exactly where we want to be, right? If we're going to find the victims, if we're going to reach them where they are. And so we go there and we try to be like Jesus. Is that your guys' goal every day, right? We try to feed 5,000. We only have 4,000 so far, so we're still trying to get there. That was a church joke. Some of you guys have read your Bible before. So we feed them hamburgers and hot dogs, and I'm telling you, they are the worst hamburgers. Like it's Walmart pucks, you know. And we just love on the community. Our first and foremost goal of this outreach is to let kids be kids. For 2 hours, for 3 hours of their week when we're there. Let them be a kid for a little bit. A couple months ago, we were knocking on apartment doors as we tell them, hey, we're here. Many times we show up with the truck and trailer and they're like, the barbecue people are here, and all the kids come running. It's awesome. But we go door to door as well to invite everyone that didn't know what was happening. And we knocked on a door, and a young mom comes to the door. And she says, how long are you guys going to be here? We say 2 or 3 hours until we run out of food. And she said, okay. She hands us her 2-month-old child and says, can you watch him? I'm going to go get high. Now I'm telling you, we've never met this mom before. She had just moved into this complex. She didn't know us from anybody. And I'm sure all of you are really great people, but I would not hand you either one of my children to watch for a couple hours, right? Especially not knowing you. And so obviously we said yes, right? We're going to keep this kid safe for these couple hours. And the barbecue continues to go on, and then we run out of food, and we pack up the trailer, and we still have this 2-month-old child. And we go to the office, and we say, hey, this is so-and-so's apartment number, whatever. They say, yeah, we know. This happens all the time. Can you imagine how vulnerable that kid was? To what could have happened to him in those 3 hours that we had him? Obviously, CPS got involved and all that stuff. The story ended good, okay? But the reality of what these kids are facing. We'll have dads standing around like, you know how dads are, like 50 feet away, like watching their kids. They don't want to talk to anybody. You know those people, right? And so we'll go talk to them. They love it. And hang out with them, and they'll tell us 2 things. First, they say, I haven't seen my kids smile like this in years. Because they get to escape their life for a little bit. They get to have fun in a safe environment. Many of the kids say, my parents never let me play out here because it's not safe. And the other thing we've heard is, I haven't had a cheeseburger in years. That's the poverty that they're living in. Many of us have them too many times a week. Anybody? My wife makes fun of me. I can eat pizza and hamburgers every day of the week, okay? That's me. Anybody? Okay. Anybody a vegan? I'm kidding. But that's the reality of what they're living in. Also, while we're there, we are gathering intel. We can identify the young women, young girls that are being trafficked, and connect them with resources. Another thing that we do is we search for missing children. Now, if you were listening in the beginning, you'll remember I said they aren't abducted, right? They aren't taken. But runaway children become trafficked children. That's the connection. When a kid runs away within 72 hours, they will be contacted by a trafficker 68% of the time. And we see it all the time, right? Teenagers run away. We know of it happening, but we don't realize that the clock is ticking. And you wonder, how do traffickers find these kids so fast? They're already talking to them right here, right? If you watch the movie, they talked about it a little bit, that they're looking for that vulnerable moment. They're looking for that post on Snapchat stories or whatever it is. I hate my parents. I'm so mad. I had a terrible day, whatever it is. And they swoop in and sell them the world in that moment. And so the clock begins ticking the moment they run away. And it's estimated that 98%, I'm a stats guy, so if you aren't, you can just ignore this, okay? 98% of missing kids that are found are due to somebody like us doing strategic neighborhood canvassing. What does that mean? Handing out flyers, hundreds, thousands of flyers in a strategic neighborhood where that kid has been seen. Now, are we going to hand out a flyer in Wadena for a kid missing in Kentucky? Probably not going to work very well, right? But when we have actual intel that this kid was seen at that 7-Eleven, or they go to school, or so-and-so saw him walking down the street, and we flood that neighborhood with flyers, 98% of the time that kid is found. Why? Because now you have hundreds, if not thousands of people looking for that kid. That is how you have success. This young boy a couple months ago in Vegas that we searched for, by the time we got the case from law enforcement, it had been 8 days that this kid had been missing. And as we were knocking on doors, we don't always get all of the intel, right? We're not law enforcement, so we don't always get everything from them. We ended up knocking on the mom's door. That's his mom and 2 sisters in that picture. Obviously, that's a strategic neighborhood, right? That's where he lives. He grew up in that area. And as we were knocking on that door, another one of our team members called and said, I found the kid. He was a couple blocks away sleeping on a couch of one of his friend's house. But as we got more into the story, as we heard more of the details from this young kid, 8 days ago he had ran away. He found a couch to sleep on, but in order for him to sleep on that couch, there were strings attached. Things that he had to do with the dad of that house in order to have a spot to sleep. You can fill in the lines on that. So for 8 days, this boy was trafficked, just blocks away from his house. And as we found him and brought him back to safety, and again, all the needed people got involved, we were standing there with the mom. First of all, she got to make the phone call to the investigator, "I have my kid." But then after she got off the phone call, she looked at us and said, "Why do you care?" Like, not in a mean way, but she was like, "Why would you all fly in? I'm from Minnesota. We have team members from Colorado, Utah. We had like 30 volunteers, I think, from Minnesota in Vegas that week for one of our missions teams." She's like, "Why do you all care so much about my kid?" She's a single mom, doesn't have a community, doesn't have a village. She's like, "I didn't know anyone in this world cared about my kid, let alone being willing to come all the way out here to do this." And if you've ever done outreach on the street, or just in the community with people that don't go to church, we usually don't start with revelations, okay? Like, that's usually not the best spot to start with the unchurched people, right? That's good for maybe Bible study, but not out on the streets. We start with what's called the simple gospel. What does that mean? It's the parables that you learned in 2nd grade from Ruth or whoever it was in Sunday school, right? It's the simple stories that are in the Bible, and we use the simple gospel of Jesus leaving the 99 for the one, right? For you have I've heard that 100 times. But for them, it's life-changing. Telling about a Savior that would leave the 99 to go after the one that had gone astray. And that's why God compels us as Christians to leave the comfort of our homes and inside of the churches and to go after those that are missing. That is why we were in Vegas. For her, she says, there's a Savior that would do that for me. Just simply being where the people are is where lives are changed. The rest of the story is her whole family is involved in a great Assembly of God church in Vegas. Their life has turned around as a result. Why? Because missions, people ask me sometimes, what is missions, right? If you grew up in the church, you think Africa and China, right? That's what I always said. I would never be a missionary because I never felt called to go into those countries. So what is missions? Missions is going after the people that will never walk through the doors of this church on their own. Right? There are some people that you send an Easter postcard to, or they see a social media post, and they're going to walk through the church someday. We hope and pray, and we need to do that. But there are certain people in our communities and in our country that will not walk through the doors of a church unless somebody goes and gets them. Unless somebody meets them where they are in the hardest spots of their life, in the addictions that they have, in the struggles that they have. Somebody that's willing to sit with them in that darkness for a moment and tell them about the light that's available. That, in my mind, is what missions is. To go after those that need somebody to bring them. As I said, we do school assemblies. And if I had the time, I could show you thousands of these pictures that I'm going to show you this morning. Of the stories, the testimonies that kids have written out of what they have gone through. And I've been on this, like I said, I've been part of this for 7 years. And still at the end of school assemblies, I almost start crying. Because I don't think as adults we understand what kids are facing today. I think we almost as adults have to have a little bit more empathy, a little bit more compassion for things that students are dealing with today that we did not have to deal with. No, I'm not that old. I'm getting older. But even me, there are things that kids are facing today that I never had to deal with. So I'm going to show you a picture of 2 of the testimonies that have been written out. It says, "I can't feel safe. I live with my dad who used to be abusive. My mom and stepdad sold my body for drugs. I have never had a home." A young 13-year-old girl in Mississippi. Can you imagine being in that spot where neither option is good, right? The best of 2 options in her case, I guess, is living with dad who used to be abusive to her. The second one, you don't need to read it all because it's really long. But the first sentence is the reason why I have it up there. It says, "I was going to take my life tonight, but this assembly changed my life." The This was a 16-year-old in Atlanta, Georgia. This assembly ended at 2:30 on a Friday. Within half an hour, this I think sophomore was going to be at home by herself. She had the plan, she had the note. Within a half hour, her life was going to be over. But by the grace of God, in that moment, her life was saved. She actually handed us her suicide note. Told us the whole plan of what was about to happen. Why? Being where hurting people are in that spot. There's another testimony card that we're not going to show this morning because it's a little graphic for the ages that are in the room. But to summarize it for you, it was a 14-year-old in Colorado. She described everything that happened in her childhood, in her life. Things that she had to do with parents and that she was forced to do. And at the end of this long story, she wrote the most heartbreaking words I've seen on one of these testimony cards. Said, "And I can't tell the rest." And I remember reading this story, and we knew who had written it, and we connected with her afterwards. But I remember reading this story and thinking, how can you write out all of this detail that has happened in your short life, 14 years, but you can't tell the rest? What else is there? And again, as we talked to her after the fact, she told us, she said, "I only told you my story, and I only am talking to you right now for one reason." She said, "It first happened to me when I was 5 years old, young girl in Colorado." She said, "I was 5 years old when this first happened to me." She said, "In 2 days, my sister turns 5. And I never want what happened to me to ever happen to her. You said you would get us help. Would you please get us help?" Once again, their lives have completely changed as a result. Right? That is what keeps us going. We just not only rescued a victim out of trafficking in a random school in Colorado that nobody even knew, but we just prevented a 5-year-old girl from ever facing that reality. And these aren't just like, again, a few stories. Every single week that we are out, these stories keep on coming. It's the reality of what we face. Another outreach that we began doing was this Operation Dark Net. These victims were being sold all across the internet on the dark web. And we had this thought that if a random guy can fly to Las Vegas and order a victim to his hotel room, then we can find these girls too, right? You don't have to be that tech savvy. You just got to know what you're doing. And so we got a bunch of burner phones and a bunch of computers that BGMC donated, if you guys know what that is. And we reach out to victims through those technology services. And in Kansas City, we were just down there during the World Cup. And in 2 nights, we reached 1,700 victims that were being exploited in Kansas City. Had real conversations with about 90 of them back and forth, their story of being a single mom, of whatever their story was. We got to pray with 45 of them through a voice prayer. And 4 of them called the hotline that night to get help. The reality is that wasn't all of them on the dark web. We also do this in Minnesota. There's a great church in central Minnesota that we've done this through. We have more that we're doing in the future. But people once again ask, is it really that bad in Minnesota? In one night, this was back in, I think, March, we did it just Minnesota victims and reached 1,800 victims in one night. 1,800 victims. You could take all of New York Mills, put them in a building, and that still wouldn't be enough, right? That's the reality. I'm going to show you 2 text responses that we got. And when I say that they're our kids, they're our grandkids, this is why. It says, "Thank you so much. This made me very sad, but I'm fine. Thank you. These are probably the prayers of my parents, who are pastors of a church. I know they have me in their prayers, and I grew up in the church. Even if you don't believe it, I was even baptized. I know God has great purposes for me, but everything comes in his own time. Thank you so much. I would appreciate it if you could pray for me." I share that for a couple of reasons. These are our kids. Our parents, once again, were pastors at a church, and it sounds like they still are. There was a Sunday school teacher that taught her every single Sunday about everything there is in the Bible, right? There was a youth leader and a youth pastor that probably poured into her. There's all these people connected. These are our kids. This is a Minnesota girl. That night when we did it, once again, 5 of them called the number to get rescued, to get out, and she was one of them. I share that for another reason. If you're a parent, if you're a grandparent, never quit praying for your kids. Never quit praying for those that need to come back to the Lord. I don't know how many years her mom and dad wept at the altar of their church on a Monday, on a Sunday, whatever it was, went to God in prayer knowing what was happening to their daughter, but simply not feeling like they could do anything to help her. Keep praying. This is another one from Minnesota. It says, I'm struggling with paying my rent and addiction, and I'm wanting to get out of this lifestyle, so if you could pray for that, I would appreciate it greatly. I'm a single mother, and I'm just trying to make ends meet. And I've been in this lifestyle for 17 years. I'm tired of it. The average lifespan of a victim of trafficking is 7 years. From the day they are first trafficked, if they are not rescued and obtain freedom within 7 years, literally lifespan, like their life will probably end after 7 years. There's many reasons, right? Physical abuse, trauma, probably addiction. Their trafficker doesn't need them anymore, whatever it might be. And we are told with victims that we have rescued that they have quotas for between 10 and 15 times a day they must be sold in order to meet their quota. I have not done the math on this one, but if you can imagine 10 times a day for 365 days of the year, for 17 years, you can imagine what this young mom has been through, right? She was also another one that called the number that night and got out. One last thing I want to share about before I get into the message. He said I can end whenever, right? There's no Vikings game today, so we got nothing to get to. No, I'm kidding. But 3 years ago now, we were praying about what God had for us next. Our team was growing. We have 5 people on our team full time now. We're always going to do Vegas. We're always going to do school assemblies. But we felt like there was something more that God was calling us to. And at one point, God had put Puerto Rico on my heart, just randomly, as I was in my prayer time, devotions. But I didn't say anything about it, right? And then about 3 weeks later, the other co-founder, Andrew, we were talking, and he said, I feel like God is putting Puerto Rico on my heart. Don't you love it when God does that, right? I'm like, crazy, me too. So we flew down to Puerto Rico for 48 hours, very quick trip, to see what would God have us do down here. And we went to the church that the superintendent of the AG, that just means he's the boss of the Assemblies of God down there, for those of you who don't know. And we met with him afterwards, and he looked at us, and we told him what we do. And he said, I have been praying for you to come for the last 2 years. He said, every single day I pray that somebody that can do something about trafficking would come to this island, because we have young women and young girls that are being trafficked that used to go to our churches, and we simply don't know what to do. So we said yes. And then he says it's never below 80 degrees down there in the winter, so we said yes again, right? But God has opened the doors for us down there. Our heart for working in Puerto Rico was this. We don't want to be people that come onto the island and tell them we know how to do it better, right? That usually doesn't work, right? We wanted to identify Puerto Rican ministries that were already doing good work and see how we can help them grow. How we can help them reach victims better than they are, not taking over, not telling them how to do it, but simply coming alongside. And one of the greatest needs that they've had, I'm going to get into that in a second, one of the ministries that we did is connected with a church that wanted to reach out to victims that were on the street. They specifically had a heart for the LGBTQ community that was being exploited on a certain road in Puerto Rico. And when we were down there the first time, we walked away from the hotels, and like 2 blocks away, there were 2 streets literally lined up with girls for sale. You don't see that on the mainland, right? That's not what we see. But in Puerto Rico, hundreds of girls that you could just walk down and buy. But there was a certain road that this community was being exploited in. And they're like, we want to do a dinner, a gala, we want to have a speaker, we want to have music, and we want to do it at our church on the rooftop. They have like a rooftop patio, which is kind of cool. I wish we had one, right? And we want to invite them, and we want to do it on a Friday night. It's the only night that worked for them. We're like, okay. So we paid for the catering. It wasn't that much, right? We said, we want to see this happen. And so they went out on the street the 2 nights before and reached out to those on that road and said, hey, would you come? We just want to love on you. We want to bless you. We want to feed you. We just want to speak life into you. And we didn't know how it was going to go, right? You never do, right? You plan things for ministry. Maybe somebody will show up, right? And that night, 25 victims showed up on the rooftop of a church because somebody went out there for them. Somebody invited them to come. Again, there was music, there was food, but at the end, there was a message by a Puerto Rican pastor that told them about Jesus. Now, was it hellfire and brimstone? No, because that usually doesn't work, right? Now, was it all grace and love and you don't need to change? No, it was in the middle, right? That God loves you, but he has called you for something more. He has called you to be like he has created you to. And at the end, they did an altar call. And they invited every one of them, if you want to accept Jesus, if you want to change your life, if you want freedom, raise your hands for salvation. And that night, at least 5 of them raised their hands. Their lives have completely changed. They are not a part of that community anymore. And they are attending that church on a weekly basis because somebody was willing to go. But one of the biggest things, as I mentioned, is identifying ministries and seeing how can we help. Down in Puerto Rico, the poverty rate is very high. Almost all the pastors are bivocational, if not totally vocational, right? Not paid by the church. They just simply don't have the funds to do the small projects that they need. This was a school in the mountains of Puerto Rico. A pastor started it after the hurricane 9 years ago. 65% of the schools shut down because of the hurricane. Never fixed them, never rebuilt them. Can you imagine in our country if 65% of our schools closed tomorrow? Some of you might be like, praise God, but that's a different conversation, okay? But can you imagine, like, how far would our kids have to drive if 65% of the schools closed, right? And so many of these kids were out on the streets. Many of them, their parents are selling drugs, whatever it might be, being trafficked. And so this pastor started this school. But they have power issues and water issues in Puerto Rico. They lose power at least once a week. They lose water at least once a week. And they're different days of the week, right? You never know what's going to happen. And so they can do school without power. They have solar energy and they can go outside. But once the toilets quit flushing, it's kind of a problem, right? So they have to cancel school. And so we said, what do you need to fix that problem? I said, well, we need a rainwater retention program, a whole tank system. It's a major project. We can't do it. And we said, okay, how much? And they're like, it's a big project. And they said, $5,000. For them, that's like a major hurdle that they will never be able to cross. For us, yes, $5,000 is a lot of money, but it's manageable, right? We can do something about it. So in August, we had the opportunity to install a full system, and in January, we were there working on the building, painting it. What was cool is they had no water that day, but they had school. Why? Because they can flush the toilets with that. And then another project that we got invited to be a part of was Teen Challenge. Everybody know Teen Challenge? We love them. It's an addiction recovery program. If you're not aware, they have them all over the world, including in Puerto Rico. But they didn't have a detox program for the young women that were going through the program. So they were sending them to a hospital to go through the medical detox program. And 95% of them were walking out the door of the hospital, going right back into the life that they knew, right? And so as we talked to the director, we said, how many of these young girls that you have in this program have been trafficked? Because that's our target, right? We don't want to drift everywhere. We want to stay on target. She looked at us and said, I've been here 10 years as a director. I've yet to have a girl in this program that has not been trafficked. In Puerto Rico, if you're a young girl with a drug addiction, you're going to be trafficked. Everyone knows that. And so as we partnered with them, we were able to build this detox program, the center with them, that just opened in February. And right now, there is 6 young women in that building right now going through the detox program for the next couple weeks. There's been multiple before that since February. And what's cool is 100% of the girls that start in that room have made it across the sidewalk to the long-term program. And then we told God, anybody tell God anything ever? It's a good time. We told God we're going to take a break from projects, right? Because raising money all the time, is difficult sometimes. And then our personal missions budget suffers, and it's a big thing. So they told God, we're going to take a break this year, no more projects. And then we audibly heard him laugh. You ever hear that? Right? And so the superintendent of the AG said, hey, we were down there in January. He's like, I was just given a house by a lady in Puerto Rico. But the requirement is it has to be a rescue home for traffic victims. And he looked at us and said, you're the only organization I know of that can actually get it done. I said, so you're going to get it done, right? Anybody ever do too good at their job and then you just keep getting more work? That's what happened here. And so we said, yes, we would love to. And so this is the beautiful house that we have been given. As you can see, it needed work. And so it is a 6-bedroom, 3-bath house that we are projecting will be open by this time next year. And the crazy thing is there is no other rescue home in Puerto Rico. So anytime we've pulled young victims off the street, there is nowhere to send them. And most of them don't want to fly to the mainland, right? They don't know anybody there. And so it'll be the first of its kind. We had a team there from Colorado just a couple weeks ago, and we got the whole thing painted. There's a little more painting to do. And we are going to get this again open by next year. Pending finances, as always, right? We need to raise about another $20,000 to get this house completely done. So if you would say, I want to be a part of that project. But God, as we were praying through this project, spoke to me about this whole thing. About like what it could look like, what would it be, and I very clearly felt him, again, not like audibly, but felt him impress upon my spirit saying, it's not about the girls. I'm like, what do you mean, right? Isn't it about the girls that we'll rescue and put in this home and will live for 2 years and learn how to live a life out of trafficking? Isn't that what it's about? But I felt God say, it's not about the girls. It's about their kids. It's about their grandkids. He said this one home, the first 6 girls that go through this program, however many it's going to be, like, yes, their lives will be changed, but can you imagine generations of families being changed because one person went through that program? You're going to change generations of Puerto Ricans by a simple house. So again, if you would consider that a worthy investment, you can talk to me after service or you can give in the offering. Everything that goes to the offering is going to that rescue home today. But really quick, I'm going to do a quick message. I don't know if Pastor Stu says that, but I'm going to do it quicker, okay? We'll see. But we're going to look again at simple gospel. I love doing that because sometimes we get too bogged down in the really complicated stuff in the Bible. I want to look at Luke chapter 10 this morning. It'll be on the screen as well. But it is the story of the Good Samaritan. Most people know that story. But don't tune me out, please. I want to look at what the story has for us this morning. It says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. You've answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this, and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself. Any of you try to do that? You ever try to justify yourself with God? I know I'm not the best Christian. I know my life hasn't really lived up to what it's supposed to be, but at least I'm not like so-and-so at church, right? At least I'm not like that person. At least I'm doing better than them. We try to justify ourselves. So we asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? He's like, it's just the people I like, right? Just the people I enjoy talking to, the people that vote the same way as me, whatever it might be. Just those people, right? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. I'm going to stop there for a second. These two people were in ministry. They were ministry guys. If anybody in this story should have been compelled and called to do something, it was these two, right? Because of everything that God calls us to do. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, which is 2 days' salary, and gave him to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Can you imagine doing that today? Right? Obviously, hospital bills are different, but which of these three was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. I want to caution you this morning that sometimes when you read stories like that, we automatically say, oh yeah, I'm the good Samaritan, right? We always try to pick the best character. We say, yeah, I'm definitely like him. But I want to caution you to sometimes read into that story and say, am I more like the other two? Right? I know it's hard to think bad about ourselves, and we shouldn't do it too often. But be honest in the fact of, what has my life looked like the last month? Have I been willing to stop for those that need my help? My point number one this morning is this: pity doesn't save lives. If you go back in the story, it says that the Good Samaritan had pity on him. But did it stop there? No. Again, he knelt down and bandaged and put him in his donkey, right? And then brought him to the hospital. I think a lot of times we can have pity for a lot of stuff. I think we almost have pity for too many things, right? Because we're overloaded by everything. We know every bad thing that happens in the world before it happens half the time, right? Anybody watch TV too late at night? All right, you all go to bed by 7. Awesome. If you're like me and you watch TV too late at night, there's a terrible commercial that comes on the TV. You guys know which one? Specifically, the In the Arms of the Angel. I'm not going to sing it because I'm not a singer, right? That terrible commercial, and that's why it's terrible. They have really bad videos of dogs in terrible situations, right? And cats. Well, anyways, the dogs. We don't worry about the cats, okay? They have dogs in these commercials. And I've never seen it happen before with my dogs. We have 2 golden retrievers, but somehow they get those dogs to cry. Have you ever seen that? They have a tear coming down the cheek of that poor dog. I don't know how they do it, but they do. And I honestly, we have dogs. My wife has 2 cats, okay? We're animal people. I have pity for those animals, right? I hope we all do, unless you're a terrible person. Maybe you're better than me, but I have never sent $1 to that organization, right? I have pity, but did it do anything? Right? Pity is just feeling bad about something. I would even say empathy is acknowledging the thing that's happening. I think God calls us to have compassion. Pity doesn't do anything. Compassion has action, right? We have to do something. We have to change the outcome. We have to be a part of getting the half-dead guy out of the dirt and bandaging him. That is where lives are changed. Point number 2 is living on mission takes time and resources. I think sometimes in the American church, the first thing is harder than the second. Being honest, right? Sometimes it's easier to throw a little bit in the offering than to give time to do the siding, right? Whatever it might be. In America, we have this badge that we wear. When somebody asks, how have you been doing? You know what 90% of the answers I get besides good? The other one? Busy. How often do we say that? I've been so busy, right? It's almost like pride for us. I'm so important that I have been so busy, right? We almost wear it like a badge of honor. I want to challenge you this week, if I may. Any of you type A? You have everything on a calendar, and you have 10 spreadsheets for each spreadsheet, right? That's me. I want to challenge you this week to pray a dangerous prayer. That's kind of like when you pray for patience. Never pray for that, okay? You're going to be stuck with the most annoying coworker all week. That's how it works. But my dangerous prayer this week is this: God, mess up my schedule this week for the sake of ministry. I know you don't have to pray it, but it's a dangerous prayer. But this is why I think that's important. We are always going somewhere. That Good Samaritan, by the way, wasn't just going out on a Sunday afternoon drive. They didn't do that in Bible times with a donkey, right? He was going somewhere with his donkey. Would you allow God to mess up your week a little bit for the sake of those that need him? To slow down enough when you're at the gas station to ask the worker to say, how are you really doing? You ever look in somebody's eyes? Really. Don't be creepy about it, but when you look in somebody's eyes when you're talking to them, you can almost know most of their story before they say anything. What do I mean by that? You can see the sorrow, the sadness. You can see the excitement, whatever it is. Will you look in people's eyes this week and say, how are you really doing? Or maybe that person that you're thinking of right now, that God has been putting on your heart to spend a little bit of time with. That single mom that maybe just needs a little bit of help, right? That widow, that widower that just needs somebody to go drink a cup of coffee with them, whatever it might be. Would you allow God to mess up your schedule? I know you got to get to Bible study and you got to go to the grocery store, got to do this. It's okay, right? Allow God to work with you, work in you this week. And the last thing is this: go and do likewise. I love it when Scripture ends with that. Why? Because it isn't just a command for this random guy that was trying to justify himself. I believe it's a command for us as well. To go and do likewise. To reach out to those that are hurting in our communities that just need a little bit of help. That's my challenge for you this week. If you're going to take it, awesome. If not, that's okay. But let God work in you this week. Lastly, I'll end with this and I'll hand it back to Pastor Stu. If you want to support our ministry, monthly, one time, whatever it is, that's a QR code. Otherwise, for the old school people, I have a card in the back. So thank you so much. And with that, Pastor Stu.
Thank you, Caleb. I love that line to go and do likewise. It doesn't mean go and find somebody who's been beaten half to death and left on a street and then help them. That's not what that means. That means to go and love on somebody that needs it, just like that guy did. I couldn't help but think that our lives were changed about 14 or 15 years ago by a missionary who had the nerve to come and preach about going to Haiti and helping people in Haiti, because that's what they were doing at the time. But that didn't really resonate with us. What resonated with us was something that I don't know if anybody else picked up on, was that he had adopted some kids. And that's what planted in our hearts that God was asking us to do that. It was to go and do likewise, but it wasn't even what he was talking about. It was something else that resonated because God had already been working on us. That just like he had done, and not what he's talking about, but that other thing in the background there that resonated with you. We all know somebody that's going through something. And we know that everybody's going through something, even if we don't know what they're going through. We need to love and serve like Jesus likewise. Pray for those that you just, I don't know what it was, something about that cashier at the grocery store that has checked out my groceries over and over again. Something was different today. Pray for them. You don't have to know what it is. Pray for them. That might be the likewise that God's calling you to. Caleb did share something that I am going to. He shared it with me earlier. There's 2 missions trips opportunities that we could get involved with. One of them was going to Vegas, and he said that they've taken people. They'll be doing it again if anybody would want to get involved with that. That's one ministry. Going down the street and talking to people, which is totally comfortable for some of us. And some of us would much rather grab a hammer, a drill, a saw, a square, a scribe, and go try to help somebody who speaks very little English. And I would much rather minister to that guy and build something and fix something. So that home they need money. But guess what? With all the money and all the supplies, you still need hands to put it together. So if that's something that resonates with you, talk with Caleb, talk with me. I would love to put together, at least for 2027, a missionary trip or two as opportunities for us to be able to go and be the hands and feet, to love and serve like Jesus. To our community, yes, absolutely. But God works on you when you step away from here and go over there. It does bless them. But the work that's done there spiritually is almost 95% done on you. Because you are now out of your zone, you're out of your comfort, and God can really speak to you when you're doing that kind of work. I'm going to ask the ushers if they would grab the other plates. I see one. I think there's two back there. If you would like to help us support Caleb and his ministry, you can make all the checks. If you're making a check, you can make that out to Central Haven Church, and we will gather that, and we will give one check to him for that. But as they're doing that, I was going to ask if him and his wife would be able to grab Max and wrangle him up here as well. We could pray over them. And I do love the fact that he took a whole hour so that it's going to seem like my messages are really short. Which means I can go longer and still be short. That's a double blessing.